Thank you for joining us. And apologies, we had a couple of glitches before we got started, but yeah, we're now underway and ready to go. So, Andy, would you like to get us started?
You've just disappeared, actually, Brad.
Oh wow.
So hi, I'm Andy Roots. I'm a director of Numeric Bookkeeping, and I'm going to be the person that's actually going to be asking the questions. As you can see, I'm the invisible man, but that's fine. I'm not the important one here. It's our two stars. So I'd like to introduce Trudi Yip, founder and managing director of Numeric. So Trudi, just want to quickly give some people, the people on the call, a little bit of background about yourself.
So some of you may know that we started Numeric Bookkeeping about 14 years ago. And I suppose this is quite an interesting time with, well, everyone knows COVID, people and all government stimulus, and I suppose this has been a challenging time for our industry, but challenging more so in helping our clients and just people in business, because there are so many changing moving parts right now.
Yeah, so what we're hoping to do today is to help you plan out how you get your staff ready for the return to work, staff and your business ready for the return to work. And we're going to look at that through two aspects. One is what the financial implications are and how you can manage through those. And then we're going to overlay staffing and resourcing over the top of that. So we'll talk about performance. We'll talk about the outlook for your business, and then we'll talk about some of the actions that you may be able to take. We've got some Q&A that we're going to work through on this. So yeah, now we're off and running. We'll dive into some of the questions and get started. So,
Brad, did you want to quickly give people an overview of who you are as well?
Yeah, sure. Thank you for that. My name's Brad Adams. The business that I run is called the HR Adept, and we provide outsourced HR services to small businesses. So as you would imagine, we're very busy at the moment, working through all the changes that occurred to the Fair Work Act, temporary changes, looking at how businesses can ensure they have the right resources now and the right resources for the year ahead. So yeah, as I said, very busy, and looking forward to assisting some of the further small businesses out there in making the most of their staffing.
Cool. So thanks. So if anybody has any questions on the way through, please feel free to add them into the chat box. That would be great. I've just got a few questions that I'll get the conversation off and running with, and it's really around people coming back into the office and what the potential costs and ramifications will be for people coming back into the office, but potentially, do you have a mix of shifts, people coming in one week, a set of other people coming in the following week? What are the implications around costs, infrastructure costs, etc., IT, etc.? So Brad, so I guess the first question I've got for you is, when do you bring everyone back into the office?
Yeah, it's a very good question, and it seems to be a rush just for everyone to return to the office as soon as possible. However, there's other things to consider around that. If we take a look at people's performance over the period of time, we've actually seen some great productivity coming through. People who typically spend 8 hours in the office and produce a desired outcome are still able to do that from home without the challenge of distant traveling, the commute, and those sorts of aspects that go along with it. So rather than just rushing your people back into the office, take a look at whether this is the opportunity to restructure your work environment. And you mentioned shifts there, Andy. So maybe you have a schedule of some people come into the office 2 or 3 days a week and work from home the other time. So really is a one-off opportunity to say, hey, where do we get the best performance and best output out of our people? and whether that's in the office or whether that's working from home or a combination of both.
And so in following on from that, Brad, it's been quite interesting from a financial perspective. You know, Numericate, we see a broad range of industries, businesses, and most of the time the wages component, I'm talking about overhead costs, can range from about 30 to about 60% when you consider superannuation, your payroll tax, and all the various items that go just on top of your gross wages. And what's been quite interesting is even before JobKeeper came about, you know, sort of at the end of March when we had the lockdown, a lot of businesses were carrying a lot of fat. And when I say fat, business owners would take a blind eye and say, you know what, I love having that person in the office. You know what, business is business. Let's just keep going on because I can see a profit throughout the year anyway. But when we actually went through lockdown, and especially at the beginning of April when JobKeeper was coming into play, people were actually business owners were looking at their profit and loss and saying, okay, well, you know, we want to retain those profits for the last 9 months. We've been carrying some fat in the business, and because our sales are going to look like they're just, you know, going to be shy, I need to review the P&L. And this is a perfect time to do that right now before your year end, to make sure you've maintained those profits. And where I'm going to say the HR laws are changed quite considerably, right? So why not review it now, getting ready for that 2021 planning? So and I think, you know, some of those rules have changed where, you know, I mean, it's not my expert here. I'm talking to Brad here about this, but
yeah.
You know, when you've got a non-performer that you've been carrying up till now, how can you let them go? Because at the end of the day, and I'll talk more about this about the 2021 planning, but if you want to maintain those profits for this financial year, and you're looking at those people that are non-performers, how would you go about doing that?
Yeah, and that's really important. A lot of small businesses kind of put their head in the sand or ignore the need for performance management. And as soon as we start to talk about performance management, people go, oh, 15 pages of forms to fill out. You know, everyone hates the process. Nothing comes out of it. That's the performance management that grandfather used to use. Now we're talking about performance management that is designed for small business, and it's about creating meaningful conversations and creating a space for those meaningful conversations to occur. So right now we can take a look at the past. What was performance like leading into the lockdown? Who's been performing while the lockdown's in place? Have we been getting the throughput? How do we measure that performance? And then what do we want our desired performance to be in the years ahead? So by creating almost like a checklist to have these meaningful conversations, you know, what were you working on last week? You know, what was the most interesting thing you got to do? What were some of the things that were hurdles that you needed to overcome? And, you know, is there anything else that you would like to be doing within the business? So just those 4 simple questions, and, you know, they become second nature and they become ingrained in the conversation. So that allows you to get a much better view of performance. It'll uncover what training needs might be required, what challenges there might be in the business process. And that's the sort of thing that small business can handle and do. If we do that now, we can then better define how we're going to resource once we take a look at, you know, what the revenue looks like and what the costs look like. You know, is your revenue going to, you know, come back moderately, or is it going to, you know, be a hockey stick for those businesses leading into Christmas? So we want to make sure that we've got the performers on board, and we want to make sure that we've aligned that to both the costs in the business and, of course, the revenue that's coming in.
And in saying that, so this is the work that is being done right now, where a couple of weeks before the end of financial year. So your 2021 budgets should be worked on right now. And we're going to find, and already from experience, because I am working on some budgets for our clients, is they're saying, well, how do we do a budget based on the current situation? And I'm like, pretty easy actually, because you know what your fixed costs are. Now, just be mindful though that we've just been talking about non-performers, right? You've got people that are actually performers that you want to actually keep in the business.
100%.
So if you're wanting to keep those people on, do your 2021 planning so you know what your profits are going to be come 30 June 21. Now, if you plan that out for the next 12 months, you can put your resource, your people in there, and your costs, and know that your revenue might be based on the last 2 months. So you've just been trading April and May. So you'll know roughly that maybe your next 3 months, your July, August, September, will be the same similar numbers. So you might say, right, if I keep those people on, I may end up with red numbers, meaning a loss for those 3 months. But your overall, over the 12 months, you'll see that you've got profits. Now, if you see that there's a red in those 3 months, human nature and a business head says, right, I actually should get rid of those people, so I am actually breaking even. But the cost around, your recruitment costs, your training costs, the loss of time in getting those people up to speed, you see it as an investment.
Yeah, and look, there's also the intangible costs that are added to that. Divest and reinvest in your employees, and that's the time to productivity. New employees require training. That'll distract other staff as they do that training. You'll get them up to productivity, and then there's also the risk of failure. New hires always carry with them a risk of failure. So instead of, as you were saying, Trudi, instead of reacting immediately to that red on the P&L, maybe consider, can you carry those people through a little bit further for when your business turns up? And if you've done your forecasting correctly, you'll know how much runway you've got, and not make a knee-jerk reaction to red on the balance sheet.
So a good way of doing that actually is playing 2 scenarios out with your budget. So you could do a budget based on keeping those people in over July, August, September, and remembering that you need to season your sales or your revenues, because you may not have the revenues you had back in January and February in October. So season your sales, work out your budget based on those people in play. Then do another scenario, do another budget forecast of what it would look like if you were to terminate those people, and the recruitment cost and the training and all the rest of it, and see what the scenarios play out. Because I actually don't feel like there'll be too much a gap as far as, by the time you have your recruitment costs and all the rest of it, there may not be too much of a gap there.
Yeah.
So, I think people are very, as you say, knee-jerking, and they're just going, I'm going to let go of these people, but you've just lost the IP because that person may have been in the business the last 2 years.
Yeah. So the idea is to take, a holistic view of what your business looks like today, what it's going to look like, run through a couple of scenarios on that. Make sure you have the right people, and we'll do that through managing performance and understanding who the performers are in the business, and then where do you see revenue coming from, and where do you see it returning? If we have a very quick recovery, which we're all hoping for, then maybe we're going to hang on to those people. But the important thing is to make sure you have the facts and the figures behind you, the facts around who's performing and the figures around the financial side of it, before you make those decisions. So if we've gone through and putting in a performance program, and we know who the performers are, we've gone through and put our forecast in for the next year. Some of the questions I've seen coming through are, what are the next steps beyond that if we see the red, or if we see an uptick?
So, quite interesting is you might end up in the red for July, August, September, and you're keeping your people in there. another way of also, having the discussion with your team, because you actually want them in the business still, is the possibility of renegotiating where they're at, because they might turn around and say, you know what, I actually don't want to work full time anymore. I've just realized that I actually want to work 4 days a week. Have those discussions now, because that will influence your numbers as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you touched on retention earlier, Trudi. Retention's going to have a different, some different elements or levers to pull in the future. So now that people have become more used to work from home, but work from home in an ongoing manner as opposed to a day here and a day there. So those people are now used to that flexibility. The organisations that accept that flexibility, don't drag everyone back into the office, are going to be organisations that can either retain the great staff that they have, or are going to be an attractive option when they come around to recruiting. If someone's travelling an hour each day to get to work, and they're paying the costs of that, if an organisation's paying $80,000, that person might actually change organisations for work from home for $70,000. So again, cost savings driven by understanding what's important to your workers, how to retain them, and how to get them through the recruitment process as well to join you.
And also on top of that, just thinking creatively with your numbers, if your people are going to change, it may mean then you look at other aspects of what overheads you've got in your business. So it might be the rent that you're paying. All of a sudden you may not need the space that you're requiring. So guess what? Your rental, your lease or your rent might be renegotiated, so you're paying less. It might be, all of a sudden that team's not in the office, so you might have your telephone bill might be less, your power. There's a whole lot of things, cleaning, all of that.
Sure.
Also impacts your budget, and hence the reason why you really should be doing the 2021 planning now, when you're not far off the 1st of July.
So one of my clients has totally tipped their office / work from home environment, and in fact they've let go of their office. They no longer have an office. They now work from home. They're a small team, they're 4 or 5 people, but they have a Zoom on all day, every day. And if they've got a question, it's hi Anne, here's my question for you. And they continue on working as if they're in the same office. So that's an example of a real change to work process. And small business, but they were still paying approximately $50,000 per annum in rent.
Yeah.
That's profit straight back into the business, and everyone's happy. They've got the flexibility. So one-off chance at the moment to really turn around how your business operates.
So in an ideal, I think right now being an opportunity of rethinking the business, we're talking about people because it's a massive component of your expense line. But, I think if you look at your business today and say, next year, in an ideal, how do you want it to look? And then bring in the functions, bring in what the model is, rather than having the people there saying, I'm going to get them to do this, I'm going to get them to do this. No, stop, look at the business. What are the functions you really need in the business for next year? And then fill it with the people.
Yeah.
Because then that way you're actually allocating dollars to a function rather than trying to put people, what's the term? Putting people in a square
people in a round hole.
Yeah. So, rethinking about your business, and then look at the P&L, looking what are the lines that are going to change the environment of your business.
Yeah. So, and just on the financial side, I've heard some small businesses say, well, we can't afford to restructure. We can't afford redundancies. There's a lot of small businesses aren't aware that if you are a small business as defined by the Corporations Act, then you can make redundancies just by providing a notice period. There is no need for a redundancy package, which is more medium and larger business requirements. So yeah, if you do determine that you need less people or your revenue is not going to come back, then you know it really is a consideration without attached to for small businesses to look at that as a last resort. You know, Trudi spoke about job sharing, you spoke about reduced hours, and as always with getting employee engagement is actually about talking with employees and getting their ideas on what they would like to see.
So it's actually quite interesting, you know, what businesses are going to look like on the other side of this, because I think it is an opportunity for business to rethink about their people, their environment, you know, the costs. But I mean, I keep, you know, saying to all my clients, just do a budget for next year, because it will help you, you know, your planning of people, but also knowing what your profits are going to be come 30 June. You know, then there's no surprises, because, you know, we all hate surprises in business, don't we?
Unless it's a big order you weren't expecting. I can take those surprises as long as I'm resourced to cover it.
Now, don't forget also, there is still some government stimuluses that actually affect the business going forward. So just remember that we've just had the cash flow boost for the March quarter BASs. There is another one for the September BAS, up to $50,000 of your PAYG that will not have to be paid for the September quarter. So effectively, if you've got quite a sum of, you know, payroll, it means then in a total of 6 months, there is $100,000 of PAYG that's not been required to be paid. Now, it's a waiver, not a deferral, which is great. So be mindful that when you're doing your budgets, you know, you can actually put your net pays in there for the first 3 months, because you won't have to pay that PAYG up to $50,000.
Yeah, and of course with the instant write-down extensions that have been made, you can use those funds, invest them, and get the tax deduction now instantly, which will then you know, allow you to pay less tax, which is not a bad thing. Yeah, so we'd want to start to look at what some of the actions that people can be doing. We spoke a fair bit about getting their budget in place. We've spoken about, you know, making sure we understand their performance as that's occurred. So, you know, how do people start to put those things in place? So from a budgeting perspective, what's the process that you would take your clients through, Trudi?
Yeah, so you look at your expenses over the last 12 months, noting that the last 2 months of expenses is probably what the reality is going to be, maybe definitely for the September quarter, but also maybe even October, November. Use your average expenses, then work out what your revenue is going to be based on, I would again use the last 2 months of revenues to forecast your revenues out, and then do a 12-month plan. Now, most importantly, once you've done your 12-month plan, especially for July, monitor your budget versus actual each month, because then you can make the tweaks. You know, it's all about looking at about tomorrow, not yesterday. So make those tweaks that you may need to make in August and September.
Okay. And so then I'd be advocating that you match your resource planning, your headcount planning to that budget carefully. And if you do need to do a restructure or redundancies to bridge that gap, then small businesses have many options around doing it. And don't forget the changes to the Fair Work Act, that the temporary changes that are allowing employers to direct people to take their annual leave, which improves the balance sheet. Doesn't necessarily help with the cash flow, but certainly improves the balance sheet. And you know, give them the flexibility to help with the retention. So work from home, work in the office, a mix of both, do some job sharing. There's a lot of levers that people can pull to help them through. So
I think that, you know, when you're doing your budget planning, I think it's about that open communication with your team, isn't it?
Absolutely.
And by having that open communication and working out actually what do they actually want, because you know, a full-time job might change and therefore your salaries might change as well.
So, look, if we could open it up to the floor, if we have any questions and you want to pop those into the question box, we'll start to respond to some of those. Okay, so
can I just remind people as also, because this is a very traditional thing that I see every time when people say, oh, my staff costs are only the gross wages and your super. Now, people tend to forget that you've also got payroll tax, if applicable. Now, remember, your payroll tax thresholds will change this year and next. And they are deferring those taxes, and they still have to be accrued. But remember to add on that 5.45% if you're in New South Wales, and also your workers' comp as well. So there's a number of things that you would also consider when you're talking about staff costs. It's not purely just your gross wages and your super.
Okay, so just had a question come through, and it relates to JobKeeper, and it's we're being asked, what if I have an employee who is on JobKeeper and they refuse to come to work their normal hours? Yeah, we asked, I am seeing some of this out there. You know, people are saying, why should I work? I get the $1,500 a fortnight anyway. Well, actually, as an employer, you can direct them to come to work. And if they do refuse to come to work, they can be stood down without pay. You can't claim the JobKeeper for those people who aren't turning up to work and you have stood down. But yeah, the JobKeeper is not free money for people to sit at home. So yeah, you do have options there.
Especially those young ones, some of them.
Well,
to get them back into the office. Wow.
and look, you know, we also need to recognise that JobKeeper's two things. One is helping people, helping employees maintain employees within the workforce and get through this. But the second, it is a stimulus package, and you know the money is there to be used and paid. So employers, if they do have gainful employment for the people or want to change their duties, which they're allowed to do under the Fair Work changes, then they certainly should be engaging those staff through JobKeeper.
And if you've got stuff like that, I would be reconsidering, well, do we actually want them in the business after all of this?
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, and don't leave it. If they're on JobKeeper, don't be thinking, oh, well, they're on JobKeeper, I'm going to wait till September and then do something about it. In actual fact, why not do something about it there? Because you know, the JobKeeper is just keeping them in the job. Maybe look at terminating them now, because you don't actually want them in the business after September.
Yeah. And so there's a question just come through on how do we go about determining redundancy situations? Well, so for a small business, first of all, there's no impact on the P&L from a redundancy perspective, from a cash flow perspective. You need to pay out their entitlements.
Absolutely. You need to just make sure that then there's no long service leave, and you know, all those annual leave that they haven't used up.
And so then the actual process, and I want to point out here that when performing redundancies, you need to be very careful not to mix up performance and redundancy. It's not the person who's being made redundancy, it's the role is no longer required for the business going forward. So there's a process of consultation first. So you'll take a look at what you need from a roles point of view within the business. You'll then select the people that the people who are in the roles you believe are going to be made redundant. You then must go through a consulting period with them and look at what some of the options. And we spoke about some of those. You know, they may choose to job share, or they may choose to go to a shorter period of time. And then only after you've been through that consultation and you've explored all avenues, can you then actually terminate an employee through reasons of redundancy.
Question. Okay, so Trudi, with payments of JobKeeper, should we process via Xero? That is JobKeeper taxable? Should we be taking tax out of the $1,500 per fortnight payment. There's a number of questions in that one. Okay, so yes, absolutely, you should be processing JobKeeper through the whatever accounting software you're using, whether it be QuickBooks, MYOB, or Xero. Absolutely, you have to, because of the.
I'm on screen. I can't just. Hang on.
One saying question. So you actually have to put it through, and also because it has to go through STP. Now, when we're talking about STP, because you're doing your declaration at the end of, so the first 2 weeks of the following month, you have to do a declaration for that JobKeeper. When you're doing that declaration, it's actually feeding from STP. So you actually absolutely have to put it through the accounting software. The other question is, do we have to take tax out? Yes, $1,500 per fortnight for an employee is an additional income on whatever income they've just earned over the last 9 months. So you have to tax it at the rate of what their year-to-date earnings are. So yeah.
And one of the wrinkles around that isn't necessarily in this question, but I think we should talk to, is superannuation payable on that $1,500? And that's a much more complex question, because it depends. It's the right answer.
Yes, depends on the circumstance, and I think you have to use a case-by-case situation, because there's so many variables right now, and that's what we're doing here. We just have to do it case by case.
So could I suggest that they talk to their friendly bookkeeper to help them through that?
Yeah, you can imagine the last couple of months has been every question under the sun's been thrown at us on JobKeeper.
Yeah.
So
I love those calls that, hey, I've just got a really quick question for you around JobKeeper, or around this or around that, and then half an hour later, you're still dealing with that quick question. But hey, that's what we're here for, is to help out.
So, and can I just go over that 1,500? You've got to take the tax out. So just remember one thing. When you take the tax out, if you haven't actually taken up that $50,000 in that cash flow government stimulus, it means that makes up part of that number as well.
Well, that sounds like another one for your bookkeeper to
resolve. Yeah.
All right. So we're drawing towards the close of our session. From here, I guess I'd be asking you as a participants in this webinar, if you can answer 3 questions. Do you know how your people are performing? Do you know what your finances and what the outlook looks like for next year? And are you overlaying HR over finance from that point of view? And what actions are available to you to ensure the longevity of your business? If you can answer all of those questions 100%, then that's wonderful. If you can't, then we'd love to be here to help and talk through your specific requirements. So we're going to send out an email to all participants after this, and we'll spell out how you can get in contact with us to talk through either A, some specific issues, or B, how you can plan things for the next year.
And I think that's the key word is plan, right?
Yes. So thank you very much for joining us. I hope you found that valuable. And please feel free to contact either Trudi or myself in the coming days. Thank you all.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.